November 15th, this is Saturday. You're watching Future Television News. I'm Yumna Naufal. These are today's headlines. City of Baalbek under fire again. One person killed, two wounded in clashes between the army and gunmen. Reactions pouring in the latest from the menu of death scandal. Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnu instructs the ISF to implement health ministry requests to shut down restaurants and establishments accused of selling contaminated food. The Islamic State group is locked in a war of attrition in the Syrian border town of Kobani, where Kurdish fighters backed by U.S.-led airstrikes are mounting fierce resistance. The town of Baalbek is facing new clashes. This time, they erupted at dawn between the army and a number of gunmen in the eastern Bekaa city as the army is cracking down on wanted suspects. It said in a statement released earlier today that one person was killed while two others wounded in the unrest that broke down in the Deir el-Wasa area in western Baalbek. The victim was identified as Nadime Makhzi, while the wounded are her husband Subhi and her son Romeo. The wounded are receiving treatment at Deir el-Amal University Hospital. The Army's raid was part of a crackdown against wanted suspects that were kicked off earlier this week in the Bekaa region. But the military had earlier surrounded the town of Britel on all sides, blocking all roads leading to it. It had also set up checkpoints ahead of a likely raid of the town. The army and security forces had been carrying out in recent months raids in various regions throughout Lebanon in search of wanted fugitives and suspected terrorists. Interior Ministry Nuhad Mashnu has instructed the internal security forces to implement health ministry requests to shut down establishments accused of selling contaminated food. Abu Faoud issued a statement yesterday night asking the Interior Ministry to temporarily shut down a butcher and two restaurants in the Beirut district for violating food safety regulations. He also referred all cases to the Public Prosecutor's Office, which in turn would launch a probe and pursue the perpetrators. Earlier this week, the minister revealed the name of dozens of establishments, including renowned restaurants and supermarkets across the country, selling what he said was diseased food. Abu Faoud has said chicken and beef were the primarily products that contain harmful bacteria and described chicken farms in Lebanon as a catastrophe to food safety in the country. The scandal prompted several ministers and restaurant owners to criticize Abu Faoud for publicly naming the establishment, questioning the methods used in testing samples. But Abu Faoud has repeatedly said that the campaign would continue despite the criticism. He would stand his ground and soon would begin the crackdown on licensed and unlicensed water suppliers. MP Marwan Ahmed is scheduled on Monday to make his political testimony before the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. His testimony will pave the way to tackle the political motivations linked to the assassination of former Premier Minister Rafiq Hariri back in 2005. The prosecution had compiled 2 days ago the factors that characterized Hariri's very tense relationship with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the period that preceded the assassination. These factors include the pressure that Assad imposed on Hariri, which prompted the SCL to call for hearing political testimonies linked to the aspect of the case. Hamedi will be the first of a list of politicians who will appear before the court. Commenting on the development, Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnu hoped that the repercussions of the very difficult political testimonies will be contained in Lebanon. International powers are seeking to pressure local authorities to stage the presidential elections, highlighting the dangers of a vacuum given the developments in the region. This was very much emphasized by the visits of ambassadors of countries of permanent membership at the United Nations Security Council to Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Rai at Kirki earlier this week. Information obtained by the Daily said that the international powers are embroiled in regional conflicts that will not be resolved anytime soon, and therefore Lebanon cannot await the outcomes of the disputes to settle its own issues. Lebanon's leaderships should determine their own fate, and they will find international backing. Meanwhile, Deputy UN Secretary General Jan Eliasson is scheduled to pay a 2-day visit to Lebanon on December 11th in order to carry out contacts linked to the presidential elections and the case of Syrian refugees in the country. The Islamic State group is locked in a war of attrition in the Syrian border town of Kobani, where Kurdish fighters backed by U.S.-led airstrikes are mounting fierce resistance. 2 months after IS launched a major offensive to try to capture the strategic prize on the Turkish frontier, the jihadists have failed to defeat their town's Kurdish defenders. Buoyed by a string of victories in Syria and Iraq, IS launched a major offensive on September 16th to seize Kobani and expand its self-proclaimed Islamic Caliphate. The jihadists believed they would quickly conquer the small town in northern Syria, which was little known to the outside world before the deadly fighting broke out. Even the United States and Turkey warned in October that the town was teetering on the brink. ISIS took over dozens of villages surrounding Kobani, known in Arabic as Ain al-Arab, besieging the town's Kurdish fighters. The UN is reacting. It says that ISIS group is denying food and medicine to hundreds of thousands of people and hidden its fighters among civilians since the U.S. coalition began launching airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. Now, according to the UN panel investigating the war crimes in Syria, the conclusion from the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Syria, which is a 4-member panel of independent experts, are based on more than 300 interviews with people who fled or are living in ISIS-controlled areas and on collected video and photographic evidence. The panel said Syrians and Iraqis were subjected to an Islamic State rule of terror from its calculated use of public brutality and indoctrination to ensure the submission of communities under its control, and that the tactics include repeated violations against children and women. The top U.S. military officer, General Martin Dempsey, is in Baghdad on an unannounced visit to meet U.S. commanders preparing to expand American assistance to Iraqi and Kurdish forces battling ISIS. It was Dempsey's first trip to Iraq since U.S. President Barack Obama, alarmed by ISIS advances, ordered non-combatant American forces back into the country this summer, less than 3 years after withdrawing U.S. troops from Iraq. The U.S. began carrying out airstrikes in August, pinpointing military and humanitarian aid from nations in the international struggle against the armed group. Dempsey's visit comes in the wake of Iraqi battlefield advances touted by U.S. officials, including retaking areas around the country's biggest refinery near the city of Baiji. Coming up next, we're talking about movies, Horrible Bosses 2. We're taking a look at it and what the actors are saying about the sequel. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the 4:20 o'clock news here on Future Television. World leaders attending the G20 Summit in Brisbane in Australia concluded their first day of meetings with a working dinner at the city's Gallery of Modern Art. Earlier, Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott vowed that world leaders would deliver on an initiative to add $2 trillion to global GDP. Each country is expected to present a comprehensive plan at the summit on how they will achieve their contribution toward the goal. The summit will end on Sunday with the release of an official communique, a rundown of what the countries have achieved and what they wish to achieve in the future. So, the United States is a Pacific power committed to its Asian allies and will not tolerate small nations being bullied. These are the words of President Barack Obama. He said that in a speech aimed at highlighting his strategic rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region. Speaking in Australia on the final stop of a 3-country regional tour, Obama insisted that Asia's security order must not be based on coercion or intimidation. Although Obama did not explicitly point the finger at China, there was little doubt that he was alluding to Beijing's maritime disputes with its neighbors and growing concern in the region about its military buildup. G20 host Australia has hoped that the 2-day summit would focus on global economic growth, not security or the environment. However, the comments from Obama suggest that security will be the dominant theme. Despite Australia's reluctance to allow climate change on the summit agenda after it abolished a tax on carbon emissions, Obama spent a large part of his speech urging action on the environment. He also pledged a $3 billion contribution to an international fund to help poor countries cope with the effects of climate change. Tablets linked to the death of more than a dozen women in India who visited a sterilization camp in the central state of Chhattisgarh are likely to have contained a chemical compound commonly used in rat poison. Preliminary test of the antibiotic cyprosin tablets were found to contain zinc phosphide. This is according to Siddhartha Pardeshi, the chief administrator for the Bilaspur district. The antibiotics were handed out at the mass sterilization held a week ago in the impoverished state. At least 15 women have died, most of whom had attended the camp. The president of the women's wing of India's opposition Congress party, Shobha Ojha, labeled the medicines as fake. More possible victims arrived at hospitals from villages on Thursday and Friday, some clutching medicine strips from the Mawahar brothers and complaining of vomiting, dizziness and swelling, according to a doctor at the district's main public hospital. India is the world's top sterilizer of women, looking to contain the number of births. A strong undersea earthquake hit eastern Indonesia yesterday night, triggering a small tsunami and some panic, but no casualties or major damage. The 7.1 quake occurred west of Halmahera Island at 9:31 a.m. Jakarta time and was strongly felt in several cities in eastern Indonesia. Students and teachers were seen rushing out of a school building in Gorontalo in north of Sulawesi. The world's largest archipelago, Indonesia is prone to earthquakes due to its location on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of volcanoes and fault lines in the Pacific Basin. Now, raunchy comedy Horrible Bosses 2 faces fierce competition at the box office from another sequel. The third installment in the wildly successful Hunger Games franchise opens in the U.S. theaters just 3 days before Bosses. Bosses opens here on November 27th. But however, the cast of the movie isn't horribly worried. Horrible Bosses 2 is the follow-up to the 2011 hit starring Jason Bateman, Jason Sudeikis and Charlie Day as amateur entrepreneurs who get caught up in a kidnapping scheme when their business deal with a conniving investor, played by Christoph Waltz, goes awry. Chris Pine, Kevin Spacey, Jamie Foxx and Jennifer Aniston also star. Take a look.
Sir, we have finished your order in full and it is ready to be shipped.
Congratulations, boys. What an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cancel that order.
What do you think?
It's not like you said cancel the order.
You say cancel?
What?
Cancel what?
Cancel the order. Don't need it.
You see, boys, in 1 week your bridge loan comes due and you, of course, won't be able to pay it. And your company will go into foreclosure and I will buy all of those units for pennies on the dollar, even cheaper than I could have gotten them from the Chinese.
Okay, you know what?
Excellent. And you know the thing that about all of them that we talked about a little bit the other day is that nobody tried to do the same thing that we were doing. They played their parts, from whatever emotional place they came from, whether it be, Jen from with her deep want as a character, or Christoph as, as a matter of fact, business savvy, and right down the line. So
yes, in fact, Jen is probably the one performer in the movie that stretches the most from what you know them doing.
Yeah.
Christoph is still living in the world of how you know him, and Chris Pine and us certainly. And she's a little bit doing something that you're not as familiar with her doing.
you talking Oscar buzz for
I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah.
But it's possible.
Hi, boys. You ever done it in a dentist chair?
Why don't you go get the chair ready? I'm just gonna visit the men's room real quick.
You're welcome to do that on me.
Oh, well, it's
And?
Turn down for what?
It actually fulfills all the requirements of a great comedy because it has the silliness, it has what I hear repeatedly, the raunchiness, even though, okay, fine, if you choose to call it such. But it also has a very smart and, in a way, almost intellectual level that is hidden, just underneath the surface. And that's really the best a comedy can do. There are many, many aspects that you could actually write very boring books about. From a social criticism, from a cultural criticism, from capitalism, an economic situation, all of that. Yet it doesn't wag its finger at you or tries to teach you anything. It's a comedy. It makes you laugh about it, and that's exactly what's missing in our world.
You gotta love two-time Oscar winner Christoph Waltz. We'll be saying that very soon. And on that end, let me remind you of our headlines today. City of Baalbek under fire again. 1 killed, 2 wounded in fighting between the army and gunmen. Reactions still pouring in the latest from the menu of death scandal. Interior Ministry Nuhad Mashnu instructs the ISF to implement health ministry requests to shut down establishments accused of selling contaminated food. And the Islamic State group is locked in a war of attrition in the Syrian border town of Kobani, where Kurdish fighters backed by US-led airstrikes are mounting fierce resistance. Those are your Saturday headlines live here on Future Television. Catch us tomorrow for what's making all the latest at 4:20. From me and everybody, have a good night.
نحن إلى جانب الجيش اللبناني، نحن إلى جانب القوى الأمنية الرسمية.